really excited when Apple launched those Apple AirTags. You know, those little discs that Apple has. They're basically like a finder feature. They're like a little thing that you can put on a keychain or a backpack, or you can put them in the glove compartment of your car. And if you have lost that item, you can put it in the glove compartment of your car. If like, imagine a big parking lot.
How often do you lose your glove compartment? It's right there in the car.
I gotta tell you, Southern California being a car culture, though, there's a lot of parking lots where you can 1,000% lose your car. You're like, I don't know, was I in G4?
So you could lose your car in a parking lot. Okay, I see now. Okay, I was being dumb. Yeah, you'd use it to find the car.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, I'm not trying to find the map that's in my glove compartment. But anyway, so I buy the AirTags, and I'm like, you know what? One on my keychain, done. Yeah. One in my wallet, done. The other day, I'm like, I had to go. I don't know what I had to go run an errand. I'm like, where's my wallet? Where's my wallet? And I go, ding. You know what? I installed an AirTag in my wallet. I'm gonna turn on the Find My Wallet feature. Turn it on. Ting, ting, ting. I walk through my house listening for the ting, and I'm using my phone like a little treasure map kind of thing, telling me where to go, turn left, go 10 feet. I find the AirTag. The AirTag itself is on the floor by my bed. No wallet. It had fallen out of my wallet. Feature absolutely ruined. Like the AirTag, great, worked fine, worked wonderfully, fell right out of my wallet. So I spent another 20 minutes looking for my wallet.
Oh man, that's amazing. Now, is that really? Does it kind of tell you to go forward or turn left or turn right? It's that degree of granular information?
Yes, as you get closer, once you get within a sort of low energy Bluetooth range. So it starts off with the pings, and it starts off by saying, go 100 feet this way, 100 feet that way. But as you get closer, you get more granular, like turn slightly to your right. Go 10 feet, 10, 9, 8, 7. It'll be like somewhere within this 1 foot area is the AirTag. And,
does the tag itself beep?
Yeah, the little tag pings as well. A really soft, gentle ping. And so as you get closer, you'll find it. And apparently it also, this is starting to sound like a commercial for Apple. It also somewhat ties into a distributed iPhone network. So if your AirTag is near anyone's iPhone, it passes along the information of where that AirTag is. So
it's over here. So, which was really nice, because that friendly guy that was in cleaning your carpets and had gotten about 3 blocks away got a message on his iPhone that said that your wallet just happened to be in his backpack.
I found that to be incredibly helpful. So that it was really nice. Anyway, the good news is, AirTags work wonderfully. Bad news, you got to keep them in your wallet. That's the bad news. Yeah. So on that note, I'm going to say hello, everybody, and welcome to Comic Lab, the show about making comics
and making a living from comics. I'm Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc.
And I'm his friend Dave Kellett, cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and co-director of Stripped.
And this week's hour of Comics Advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/comiclab. So Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, my friend, with a reminder that we are going out live right now to our VIP members over at the Comic Lab Live Gab, and you can join us at the $10 level at Patreon. So make sure you do that. And we have to give a huge thank you and shout out to our friends over at Wacom, WACOM.com, the makers of the new Wacom One, a product that Brad and I both heartily endorse. We both have one in our studio. We both use it on the regular. It is fantastic. And the price point is chef's kiss good.
It's fantastic. If you're on the fence on whether you want to try digital art, this really is the perfect jumping on point. It is professional, it's portable, and it's powerful. And like Dave just said, that price point is not going to scare you away. If you're not sure whether it's going to be a good fit for you, you're not going to buy like some cheap tablet that doesn't give you a really good feel for what digital art actually is. It's going to give you your perfect introduction to digital art, and at a price that is going to make you feel comfortable trying something new.
I don't know if you realize this, but you just pulled a Stan Lee in describing the Wacom One. Do you realize what you just did? You go, it's powerful, performance, portable. You were literally like, oh, the perky peak of the perspicuity of the powerful, portable Wacom One. Like,
your Stan Lee is absolutely on point. I've got to ask you, as long as we're talking about it, what you released to your Kickstarter backers, a special video of you doing Stan Lee reading Shakespearean sonnets. What was the reaction to that?
Delight. I was so happy with that because it's so unnecessary. It was one of the stretch goals in the Kickstarter campaign. And it's so useful. Like I love the stretch goals that are basically just pure fun. Like let's just have fun. It's not all about money. So this was a stretch goal where it's like I'll do Stan Lee reading Shakespeare's sonnet number 18, which is "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more temperate and more beautiful." Oh God! And my dog in the background is editorializing on my Stan Lee. I don't know if you can hear him in the background. He's going nuts. He's like, "Oh God, is that Shakespeare? Is that sonnet 18? I'm here for it
again." How many times did he have to listen to you practicing that,
Yeah, but people loved it. And then the great thing with Stan is that anytime there's a lot of S's, and that sonnet number 18 has a ton of S's, you go, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" It's just so fun to go nuts at that.
You've got that SH S that comes out so beautifully. Well, now you talked about using that in your Kickstarter because you said you wanted some stretch goals that were just fun, that were just pure fun. And I thought to myself at the time, being the Machiavellian that I am, I thought at the time, well, that's actually pretty smart because people are going to be much more likely to share a social media post that has something silly on it, like Stan Lee reading Shakespearean sonnets, and which probably I would imagine just happened to have your Kickstarter URL on it as well.
I'm no dummy. I'm no dummy.
What did you Machiavellian? Just me. Did you see a bump? Did you see any kind of noticeable outcome out of that?
There's actually a good lesson, and I don't know where I learned it from. Maybe it was a natural thing from a shared community sense of learning. But one thing that I learned about with Kickstarter campaigns is it's a version of the lesson that we always try to tell cartoonists when they're designing a shirt or a hat or something like that, because people want to put their logo on the shirt or their logo on the hat. And the truth is, when someone buys a T-shirt, they're buying a shirt to reflect who they are, not who your comic is, right? And so when you make the joke more broad, more generalized, more, a shared sense of fun, then the person is more likely to put it on. But if you have it like Brad's Evil Inc., so why would Dave Kellett want to wear a shirt that says Brad's Evil Inc., But if you have a generalized universal joke on there from Evil Inc., much more likely to be. Anyway, what I'm getting at with the Kickstarter is when you make content for a Kickstarter that's communal, that's fun, that's just joking around, that's pure fun, and people can identify with it, then it's not about Dave Kellett's Kickstarter. It's about, hey, this is kind of fun and I want to share it. So check it out. It's Shakespeare being read by Stan Lee. That's delightful. And so we also have stuff like we have a stretch goal to add a built-in ribbon bookmark into the hardcover. Yeah. And the way we're going to do it is when 20 drive readers build one of the sci-fi drive ships in the story in Lego. So far, as of this morning, we have 19. We need one more Lego ship.
19? Yeah. Oh my God.
It's really funny. And sometimes you get these very crude Lego ships and you're like, oh, that's fine. Someone was having fun.
Yeah, you're having fun.
But then there are
that's
these, I don't remember what they're called. They're like adult lovers of Lego or something. ALOLs. I don't remember. There's like some synonym or acronym for what they are. But you'll get these somebody's like, I'm 58 and I spent 9 hours building a drive ship out of Legos. And you're like, that is perfect. It's amazing. So it builds a nice sense of community aside from promoting the Kickstarter, because people see that they're not the only one enjoying Drive. Look at what this other guy did, spending 20 hours to build this Lego ship. Like that's shared sense of fun. Anyway, that's more than you asked for in that question.
Oh, but it is something that I wanted to kind of, because I kind of figured I knew what the answer was. And I wanted to share that with our listeners because that's a really good idea that if you're looking for a little bit wider social media bounce, it doesn't always have to be about, here's my Kickstarter, here's the price, here's the reward, blah, blah, blah. Sometimes it can be focusing. It's almost like a curveball. You're throwing it out here kind of away from the batter, but it's going to come back eventually. But it's all about kind of trusting yourself, kind of a Zen approach to send something nice out into the world and then watch it come back in a pleasant way.
Yeah, and it goes back to the fundamental of why we cartoon, which is to bring a little joy, a little fun into the universe. And that's what the Legos are. That's what the Stan Lee read Shakespeare is. It's just bringing a little silly fun into someone's day. So it's a nice way to do it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, I'm really happy to hear that that's working out so well over at New Drive Book. And I want to launch us into our first topic of the show. And this is something that you brought up. and it has to do with the absolute platonic career path.
Oh, yeah. I really want to talk to you about this because you and I'm sorry if I'm getting a little passionate about it. You and I often talk on this show about career paths to avoid.
Yeah.
Don't sell out your rights. Maybe don't work for hire for your whole career because then you're left with nothing that can generate income at the end of your career. Maybe reconsider newspapers if that's still a path that you're thinking. Maybe reconsider Marvel DC if that's a path that you're thinking. And so we often talk about like, hey, just in friendship, maybe reconsider walking down that path, right? But it occurred to me as in light of my own Kickstarter, I was thinking we never really talk about what is the platonic ideal of a cartoonist career right now. Like if you and I could isolate what is the best possible way to handle your career, what would it be? And now I have really clear thoughts, but I would love to hear your thoughts first on the platonic ideal of how a cartoonist, not necessarily Brad Geiger, but a cartoonist could build and run their career right now.
Well, geez, if I had to just say it right off the top of my head, it would be kind of what we're doing now to self-publish, to run your own business, to learn your own business, keep control over the things that you have created. And then maybe kind of take the Robert Kirkman approach that we saw him doing with Invincible, where first he sold the graphic novel, then he sold, once he went through all the graphic novels, then he would re-release something that collected the first 3 graphic novels. And then he'd go through the series like that. Then there'd be the omnibus collection, that was even bigger. Then he'd basically keep selling repackaged forms of the same content that he had put out. And for me, I think that's getting pretty close to a platonic ideal. What are your thoughts on that?
Kirkman is a good example. Yes. I think starting from the bare bones, the platonic ideal is, and we've said this phrase a lot, own and control your own work. To own and control your own work means ultimately you are the decider. You are the captain of that ship. No one else is going to tell your art where it's going to go. No one else is going to tell your art where it will make you money. So to own and control is the baseline. I think the platonic ideal right now as a cartoonist is you build up enough of a Patreon community where that is more than paying for your expenses every month. You have a monthly income from Patreon. You have a fun and growing audience that's on your side. And then every year to 2 years, more if possible, obviously, you kickstart a collection from that Patreon created work, right? So you're generating income from Patreon, and then every year or 2, you're generating Kickstarter income from the physical item related to that title. And then I actually hadn't thought about it, but you're right. The repackaging of that work as the years go on is a wonderful ideal. And then my platonic ideal actually is Ngozi and Jeff Smith, because I think here's where the perfect iteration is, which is you have Patreon, you build it up into Kickstarter, you kickstart it as much as possible, you make as many books and versions and stuff as possible. And then once you have, for lack of a better phrase, walked as far down as you can that road, then you sell it to a publisher like Jeff Smith did with Bone, or Ngozi did with her work.
With Check Please,
which is like I have taken it as far as I can as an individual creator. I've made enough money as I can with just a single person running it. I've marketed to as many people as as an individual cartoonist can. So now I have made X amount of money, and hopefully it's a large sum from kickstarting it. Now, publisher, you will take it. And to me, that feels like that is our current platonic ideal, because we all know selling it to a publisher first means a smaller amount of money, and you're giving up the control. But if you have to me, the platonic ideal is to do what Ngozi did or Jeff Smith did, which is you have ownership, you have control. You're making as much money as possible. You're making all the editorial decisions you want to make. You've finished the book, you've kickstarted it, and then you maybe even kickstarted an eventual box set of the whole thing, like 5 years later, right? Yeah. All of that's done. Now you bring it to the publisher. Now you sell it like she did to First Second, I think it was, or to Jeff Smith, to Scholastic, I think it was. And then they take it with all their marketing muscle and squeeze the last drops out of that lemon, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, as dangerous it is to make, as dangerous as it is to make comparisons between comics and other medium, what I hear in that is almost a little bit of a parallel between like a network sitcom that it runs on the network for a certain amount of time, and then they sell it to a streaming service, right? Like Netflix or Hulu. Because obviously Netflix and Hulu don't pay top dollar unless it's something that they probably had created. So it's not the best, but if it's coming in at the tail end of this thing's life in terms of a product, then you're actually maximizing the money you can get out of it in that way.
Yeah. And so in your metaphor for this, in this case, you're the network, right? Is that what you're saying?
Right. Or when you're the network
Patreoning
sitcom.
it and kickstarting it.
Right.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And listen, you might be at home listening to this and going, okay, well, that's great, but I'm not Jeff Smith. I'm not saying that this is achievable for everyone. I'm saying it's nice if we all have an ideal of what is the best possible version of a career that you could hope for. And I personally feel like the best possible version of the career is you own and control and make as much money as you can while you have that ownership and control. You've tapped out that market. You've gone as far as you can, and then you sell it on, ideally keeping the television and movie rights to yourself. You sell on the publishing rights to First Second or Image or Scholastic. Image wouldn't do it, but Scholastic or somebody else like that. And they take it as far as they can take it. So that at that point, they're basically increasing the brand. You're getting $1 per book. So it's way less than you used to get. But you're now with a publisher that's getting it to a farther reach than you could as an individual.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's a fantastic point. I really do think in terms of the way you brought that up was a platonic ideal. I don't know that it's possible to make it any more perfect. I mean, that's kind of the perfect career setup is that you keep control, and then at some point later on in life, when you're ready to step back a little bit, you say, okay, I'm gonna let this generate some passive income for me now as a publisher, which is not a bad idea.
And then in an ideal sense, you do what Jeff Smith did with Razzle or something. Yeah. You move on to the next title and start the whole process over again. You know what I mean?
And start building Patreonic.
What's the one that he has about set in sort of caveman times? Not Razzle, but the other one. I'm blanking on it. Sorry, Jeff. But anyway, you do it with Razzle, you do it with his other title, you're Patreoning it, you're kickstarting it, and then 5, 10, 15 years down the road, you package it up and sell it to a publisher and you start the loop over again. Anyway, well, let's jump into the next topic, my friend. I think that puts a button on that one. So the other thing I wanted to talk to you today, Brad, was someone had brought up, I think it was MK, the idea of pro-am status. And I wanted to address MK's question, if that's okay. Okay, so this comes in from MK over at patreon.com/comiclab. I know this is a bit late, but I'm making a big decision to stop using Patreon and to stop making money from comics for the time being because I can and because I have the privilege to severely alter my business model without any financial repercussions. I revved my engines too early, as you've warned all of us not to do. So I'm going back to the drawing board and revisiting what it was about comics that instilled such passion into me. Plus, life funsies have taken priority. All of this to ask, does it matter that you don't make any money and still call yourself a comic artist? Is this what Dave referred to as pro-am? Do labels really even matter? Brad, what are your thoughts on that? Do labels even matter for a cartoonist?
Oh, this is a really great topic because it's something that I think we all need to hear at one point or another, or maybe several points during our lives. And it is really it kind of cuts to the core of why we do what we do. And that is, of course, it doesn't matter if you're not making money from your comic. It doesn't make you any less of a cartoonist. And to a certain extent, Dave, I think we back in the day when we did Webcomics Weekly, every now and again, something like this would come up, and we would start talking about the difference between being a professional and an amateur. Right. And a lot of times when we said amateur, we were saying that in kind of either a derisive or a dismissive way. Like, you're just an amateur, Right. And since those days, as everyone has kind of matured for one thing, and also gotten a lot better handle on what this thing is that we're doing, over the time, I really came to appreciate hearing people like yourself start to use the word pro-am, because it really it gave us a much better label for that place that all of us find ourselves in for a long time. And that is the time between you would be considered an amateur or the time that you're a professional. There's a lot of time in between there where you're kind of in this gray area.
And really, to focus in on MK's point, there's some times in your life where you were pro and you switch back to pro-am. And sometimes when you're pro-am, you switch up to pro and vice versa, because not all of our lives are a perfect, I'm on a rocket to the moon and I'm never pausing. You know, like the years when my kids first came along, I to be fair, I downshifted pretty significantly, you know, and my output was reduced. And so in different lives, I can see that really shifting down to pro-am status for a while, and happily so, because not all of life is about cartooning, and that's fine. But pro-am, just to be clear, pro-am is not a term that I came up with. That's a term that's more widely used. I just think it's an appropriate one for cartoonists, because a lot of us, for many years of our journey, are in that pro-am status. We're neither amateur, we're not doing amateur work, we're doing pro-level work, and we're not yet pros where it's 100% of our income. But we are doing an output that is equivalent to many of the pros in the industry. We're just not making 100% of our income there from our pro work yet, you know? So I think pro-am is a nice slice of life. And frankly, Brad, I think, oh, go ahead. Yeah, you want to jump in?
Well, no, I don't go with that thought, because I've got something to kind of bring this around, but I want to hear where you were going before I interrupted you.
Well, okay, this is more of a step back in a philosophical point, where if you separate money from your cartooning, right? Ultimately, what you're trying to do when you create a comic is you're trying to impact someone at the point of reading. You're trying to help their lives or steer their lives or help guide their thinking. And then if you're really blue skying it, you're trying to help change the course of your society, both now and in the next couple of years, right? With your cartooning, right? That's what you're ideally trying to do. And the reason I bring it to that is poetry actually has a lot of poets that can teach us how you can be incredibly impactful and yet be pro-am or frankly less than pro-am status in your income, right? Yeah. Emily Dickinson, I think she made all of $1 from her poetry in her lifetime, right? Yes. And yet her poetry has impacted more people in the English-speaking world than so many. Walt Whitman with Leaves of Grass, I think he was selling insurance or working at a hospital at the time that he wrote that. Like he wasn't, it's not like poetry was making him the big bucks and I'm a pro poet, you know? He was pro-am. And so what I'm getting at is pro level work being produced by a pro-am cartoonist is not a hit against you as a cartoonist. It just means that for whatever the reasons of income or life or lifestyle or the responsibilities you have in your own life, you're not able to dive 100% into your cartooning right now. That doesn't mean you're not producing pro level work, which might not touch hundreds of thousands of lives, millions of lives. So that's the kind of parallel. Do you see what I was going with there with the poets?
Yeah. No, and I'm glad we circled back around to that, because that's a really, really important part to bring up in this whole conversation. But also, I want to come around to MK's last question. Do labels even matter? And the answer is yes. Oh my gosh. Listen, our words define us. Our words, the way you speak defines how you think, and the way you think defines how you are. It is reality defining. And that's why I love the term pro-am, because amateur is derisive, right? It is in many cases, in many situations, it's an insult. Okay. Pro-am much more accurately describes where we find ourselves in this gray area between those two places where, yes, you are making money, but no, it is not your full-time job. But yes, you are doing this seriously, but no, it is not 100% of your income. You're in a pro-am situation. Yeah, labels matter. And that's why I really like this one as opposed to that binary, either you are or you ain't thing.
Right.
I like this because it gives us a nice gray area that is much less insulting that we can hang our hats on.
Yeah, and what Pro-Am does is it quite literally puts the pro in Pro-Am because you're not derisively, to Brad's point, walking around going, I'm an amateur. I'll always be an amateur. Something, a label like Pro-Am lets you, in a kind of neuro-linguistic programming kind of sense, you know, they always talk about with neuro-linguistic programming, you are what you say you are. So if you walk around going, I'm a loser, I'll always be a loser. But if you walk around going, you know what? Hot damn, I got some energy. I'm doing my best. I'm firing out here. I'm really going for it. That kind of neuro-linguistic programming, I know it can sound cheesy. I agree with you that it can sound cheesy when it's coming from those like pep talk, you know, guide your life kind of people. What's the character I had? Susan McTaggart. She would be into neuro-linguistic programming. Okay, everyone, remember my phrase. Seize your dreams by seizing who you are. That's some neuro-linguistic programming. Anyway, what I'm getting at, though, is that labels do matter because they tell you who you are and who you want to be. And Pro-Am is nice because it literally puts pro right in there. You know what I mean? You're keeping your eye on the ball, which is you might not be there now in a holistic sense of pro, but you're on the path. You know, you're not just forever stuck as an amateur. You're on the way to being a professional.
Absolutely. And okay, I'm going to try and bring this topic to a close with a bang, but I want you to know I'm not a sports guy, so I might fall on my face.
Then I'm 1,000% here for this because I want to hear this.
But is it not the Pro-Am athlete that competes in the Olympics? Don't you? I mean, you can't be a professional unless it's basketball. Then they break the rules. But you can't be a professional athlete and compete in the Olympics. You have to be in that Pro-Am kind of area, right?
Yes, you're right. And for reasons I still don't understand, basketball is the exception. I don't know why they allowed that to happen. But yeah, you're basically college level on you're just about to turn pro if your sport has pros. And you would, but yeah, you're right. A lot of them are like, I'm a banker, but I'm also a curler for the Canadian curling team, or I'm a college student, but I'm also one of the best pole vaulters in the world. And you're right. They're all Pro-Am.
Yeah. So in that respect, I mean, we don't look down at Pro-Am athletes. In fact, we laud them as future Olympians. And I think that's kind of how we need to start to look at Pro-Am comics artists as well.
And as we bring this to a landing, I want to ask you a personal question, Brad, because yesterday you and I were talking about Philadelphia accents. Brad now lives in Philadelphia, but is from Michigan. And here's my question for you. This is not necessarily a shot. I want to ask you, is it a Midwestern thing to insert a vowel where a vowel is not necessarily needed? And here's what I'm getting at. You said, because these are pro athletes. And the other day you said, yes, my son is a sophomore. And I'm noticing a pattern, and I'm not necessarily, because I'm fascinated by language. And so I'm curious, is this a Michigan thing where you say athlete, sophomore, and you add in an extra?
It might be a Philadelphian thing. And I'll tell you, it might be osmosis that's making it happen, because there is a grocery store chain here that has the same name as Wile E. Coyote's favorite merchant, which is ACME, which you know is pronounced as
Acme.
But in Philadelphia, it's the Acme.
No, it's not. Acme?
I swear, call anyone from Philadelphia. They'll tell you that they like getting their produce at the Acme.
So when you have to go buy Dr. Hidalgo's Lugubrious Cherry Soda, do you have to go to the Acme?
I've got to go to the Acme.
Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we've recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on Comic Lab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. No worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics. All right, Brad, well, moving into our next question comes in from Brandon over at patreon.com/comiclab. And Brandon writes, I don't think this is a question, but On a recent podcast, Brad said offhand that he had to fight for every reader he's ever gotten. And even though that wasn't quite the subject at hand, it stuck with me because I think it stands in contrast to something he has said time and time again, which goes something like this: make good comics. With the idea being that good comics can't stay hidden for long. I took this latter statement to heart and am always worried my comic sucks. But I rather like thinking that sometimes it isn't just a good comic that's successful, but the hours an artist puts in behind the scenes networking, talking to other cartoonists, putting in their 1,000 hours, I think it's 10,000 is what it meant to say, promoting, et cetera, et cetera. That also helps a good comic find their audience. Yeah. Maybe you can parse out something to talk about here, but if it's not cool, I'm just happy to know that Brad had to work for his success. Brad, oh my goodness, you're already smiling before you even start to answer the question. I know we're in for an answer. What do you got for us, my friend?
Well, no, I just had to go back and check. This episode that we're recording right now is episode number 192. We've done 192 shows. Not to mention that would also be 192 episodes of Pro Tips. And my messaging on this topic has always been very consistent. All right. And what it was, and what it always has been your number one job as a cartoonist is to make good comics. It's the number one thing that you have to do. And I believe that passionately. Okay. Yep. And additionally, anything else that you do is not going to have the kind of effectiveness that you're hoping for until you've done a good comic. So you can do your comic and open up a Patreon. It's not going to be as successful as you had hoped until you're doing a good comic. You can do all this other stuff, social media promotion, self-publishing. It's never going to have the kind of strength that you want it to have until you've done a good comic. Doing a good comic is the number one thing. However, and this stands in a little bit of a disagreement to what almost looks like a straw man argument that is being posted here, because at no point have I ever said that it's the only thing. In fact, if I thought that do a good comic was the only thing, we would have never done 191 or 192 episodes. It would have been one episode. I would have said, hey, do a good comic. Now leave me alone. End of episode.
See you later, everybody. Have a good night.
That would have been it. But no, who was it that there's so much more to doing it than just do a good comic. Do a good comic is the number one thing. It's the most important thing. And everything else you do, as I've said consistently on this show, everything else that you do is not going to be as effective until you do a good comic. But who was it that told you about the 4 C's of social media?
It was Brad Geiger.
Who was it that told you about the importance of putting your comic in a vertical scroll?
It was Brad Geiger.
Who else was it that told you about making sure you've got your own website, not just relying on social media?
It was Chris Straub a couple years ago before you came along.
Okay, I stole that one from Chris, but I got 2 out of 3 ain't bad.
So yeah, I see where Brandon's coming from here. I see their point that there is comfort in the idea that it's not just a good comic, the other thing. But I think that Brandon is unnecessarily separating what to Brad and I is a cohesive, holistic idea, which is you can do all this amazing work to market, to sell, to network, but if it's not a good comic, no one's gonna care. Like you might get sparks, but you'll never start a fire because it's like the product equivalent, Brad, is Pepsi Clear, New Coke, the Pontiac Aztec, companies that threw tens of millions of dollars of advertising, if not hundreds of millions of dollars of advertising, and marketing at this thing that was a bad product. You cannot start a fire off of a bad spark. Like it's not going to happen. So the fundamental core thing, Brandon, is to have and to do and to make and to continuously make the best comic you can, because that is the centerpiece, the foundational stone that holds up the whole building for all the other 192 episodes where we talk about what you do when you're making a good comic. Right, Brad? Is that it? Yes.
That's an even better way of putting it than I think I was getting at. In other words, it's a several step process. Believe me, If it was just to a good comic, again, this would have been a much shorter podcast. But I will say this about that, just to bring it in. Brandon mentions a whole bunch of things, networking and promotion and stuff like that. Promotion I'll give you a pass on because that social media is, I would argue, much more publishing, but it's also promotion. Networking, I got to tell you, if you think networking is going to increase your audience, you're going to have even if you're doing a pretty good comic, you're going to have limited success. Networking isn't going to do it so much. Meeting other cartoonists, those kinds of things are good in other ways. It's not going to be good in audience growth necessarily. But the main thing that Dave and I are talking about is this is a package deal. It's not just do a good comic. It's do a good comic. And then when I say I was out there fighting for readers, I didn't go up to people on the street, engage in fisticuffs, best them and say, ha, now you've got to read my comic. No, the way I was fighting for readers was in challenging myself to do a better and better comic, primarily in the writing, and then B, paying attention to what I was doing on social media, paying attention to what the landscape publishing on the web was, all of those other things. It's all one big thing. It's what makes this thing not particularly easy to do.
Let me throw out a metaphor, Brad, a sort of visual metaphor, and you can tell me if this is helpful to the conversation.
Yeah.
So imagine networking, promoting, advertising, marketing, convention appearances, the people you meet and the way you talk about the comic story. All of those individual things are Christmas tree decorations.
Yeah.
But they are useless if you don't have a Christmas tree.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So they're all wonderful baubles, they're all helpful. They sell the beauty of the Christmas tree on December 24th. But if you don't have a Christmas tree, i.e. a good comic, then none of that matters. You know what I mean? It doesn't help you at all. You're like, well, look at all I got. I'm really fired on all my Christmas decorations. Yeah, but you don't have a tree. Work on a good comic. That's the main thing. Because frankly, you can have a wonderful Christmas morning if you have an undecorated Christmas tree. A Christmas tree is still kind of magical, you know. Yeah. So I don't know where now I'm going off on. Like, I tell you what, Brad, you guys, as long as you got love in your heart, you can have a good Christmas morning.
I mean, it's kind of like sometimes the argument proves the point. In other words, I have said, and I do believe that it's impossible to hide good work on the web if you're doing a good comic. Now, the way that works is because of social media, because of promotion, because of the things that you're because you've set up your website in the way that I've talked about, that makes it easy for people to evangelize on your behalf and stuff like that. Because of all the things that we talk about on Comic Lab that you should be doing or that we encourage you to do, that's why it's impossible. It's not like people are going to break into my studio and take the comics out and force them into people's faces. This is how this whole thing works.
Yeah. I want to counterpoint one thing you said before where you had said networking doesn't help, doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
I will counterpoint it to say that networking for me as an introverted extrovert, at the moments where I have been extroverted at shows, I have built friendships and established communication lines that have been very helpful in my career. So I want to just counterpoint saying that networking does help, but I want to counterpoint my own counterpoint by saying you and I know 3 or 4 cartoonists immensely successful. I won't name them because I don't want to out them. Yeah. Immensely successful. They have never done a convention.
Yeah.
I've met them maybe once in passing because they suffer from crippling social anxiety. They don't want to do any of that. They don't want to interact with anybody. They just want to make comics. And so to counterpoint my own counterpoint, their comics are doing the heavy lifting. That's all that matters is they make good comics. They don't do any networking. They don't do any marketing. They don't do any sales. They just make good comics. And so that's
but again, before this goes off the rails, but they also do a certain degree of social media. They've got their website set up correctly. It's the whole thing.
They're not hiding their comics under a rock. Exactly. They are maintaining a public presence as we argue for. But I don't know why I felt the need to. I wanted to counterpoint your counterpoint about networking, and then also counterpoint my own counterpoint that
I'm going to counterpoint my own counterpoint because every time I bring up every time I bring up networking, you always remind me, well, yeah, but Brad, we wouldn't be friends without networking and stuff like that. In the moment, I was strictly thinking about building audience, right?
Yeah.
And so so yes, networking is not going to build audience so much, but as Dave points out, it does have a value. You know,
Sure.
I wouldn't know Dave without networking. That would be silly for me to say that networking had no value. But in terms of audience building, it's going to have a limited value to you. But yeah, Dave, you rightly point out there's a lot of friendships and a lot of times that you were in a situation and you reached out to a friend, and because you had met them, it happened to me. That's how I got started on Clip Studio. I met somebody who said, "Yeah, I'll teach you how to do that," and because I'd networked with them, they gave me a head start. So yeah, it's good for any number of things. Audience building, not so much, but worthless. No, you're right to put an adjustment on that.
But to put a capstone on the whole thing, I think Brad from the outset had the right idea, which is that it's a unitary, holistic idea, and everything is built upon the foundation of you making a good comic.
That Christmas tree analogy is amazing. The Christmas.
Oh, good.
I'm sitting here trying to pick that Christmas tree apart, and I can't. Because it's the bedrock. It's the most important thing. Nothing's going to work till you got that, and then everything else you hang on it.
And just to continue that wonderful analogy, Instagram and Facebook specifically are the lack of water at the base of the tree that are slowly strangling the tree with bad algorithms. So
they're that nasty little dog that keeps drinking all the water that dries the tree out.
And so very specifically, Facebook is the dog peeing on the tree. All right. So moving on to the next question. Thank you, Brandon, for that one. So Nemo comes in with our next question over at patreon.com/comiclab. And Nemo writes, "Hello, Brad and Dave. Recently, I found joy in writing one-panel gags built around a main character. Where do you see the difference in making one-panel cartoons like Dennis the Menace compared to multi-panel strips like Calvin and Hobbes? Do you have any tips or tricks that are specific to writing and drawing one-panel cartoons? Many thanks for all the laughs and inspiration, Nemo."
Yeah.
So, Brad, we a little bit touched on this a couple weeks ago, but this is a slightly different permutation to the idea that single-panel comic strips and comic strips, single panels and comic strips are very different approaches. And I would love to hear you jump off on this one and see where you can take us. How is a single panel comic different both in execution and in reception from a comic strip?
Yeah. For me, the single panel is all about the punchline.
Yes.
The single panel is about distilling comics to its absolute finest essence, and that is the image and the punchline. You don't have anything else that you're really allowed to work with. You really can't indulge yourself in a setup even.
Agreed.
Right? You just have the punchline. Boom. Yeah. It's like the stand-up equivalent of a one-liner. You just belt it out there and it's done. It either sinks or swims on its own merits. A comic strip it has more of a setup. I'm gonna hesitate to call it a story per se. It's not so much about the story, but it takes a little bit longer to germinate. It takes a little bit more longer. You've got some setup, you've got some nuance. It's a more obviously it's longer by at least 2 or 3 panels, but it has more to do with a development of an idea. Whereas a single panel comic is the idea, right? And in my opinion, hands down, single panel comics are the hardest to write. They're the hardest to execute well. They're the highest level of cartooning, which it tells you why I do them so seldom, and I'm so thrilled with myself every now and again when I'm able to squeeze one out. But single panel comics really are the highest form of comics. It's comics distilled to its essence.
Well, so in 1 second, I'm going to talk about the difference between panels and comic strips. I really want to drill down on this idea that it's the highest form of comics. I'm not sure I agree with this. I would like you to elucidate more on why you feel like that's the highest.
Yeah, you know what? I guess I'll dig down on that.
Can I suggest that maybe you grab a different term than highest form? I would agree that it is one of the hardest, if not the hardest things to write well.
Okay, so let's take highest out because that's a value judgment.
That's a value judgment.
If I said that single panel comics was distilled, the most distilled form of comics.
Right.
How does distilled hit you?
Yeah, no, I think you're right that it is. If we work in a reductive art, everything that we do, whether we're writing a graphic novel, a short story, a comic strip, or a single panel, all of us are working reductively. Edit out all the unnecessary, all the chaff, and we're trying to just get to the wheat, right? It's a really reductive art form.
Yeah.
And I agree with you that a single panel is the hardest to do well because it is reductiveness to the extreme. You are down to a single second of I'm presenting a moment, right? And there's no buildup, there's no explanation, there's nothing extraneous. You are just on the punchline, which makes it really hard to do from a joke standpoint.
Yeah.
Maybe it almost went unsaid, but I think it's really rare to have a single panel that is not joke based, almost impossibly rare. Yeah. They're almost always about a joke, a second that is a funny second. You never see one that's like, hey, well, I guess if you want to say that
you just remembered the existence of New Yorker cartoons, didn't you?
I was going to say Ziggy, but yes.
So very often, you've got Ziggy in there too, but very often New Yorker cartoons really aren't about the joke. They're about an emotion or an essence. It's very much if you lived in New York, you'd understand all of the subtext here.
Yeah, and that's what it is a lot of New Yorker cartoons is the sharing of a shared moment. Like we all know what this moment is on a subway, wink. Yeah. We all know what this is when you're trying to order a $500 bottle of wine at your favorite restaurant because we're all rich and subscribe to the New Yorker, wink. Whereas so for me, I think that the single panel is the reductive just to the joke. Whereas to me, a comic strip is reductive to usually recurring characters, which over the years have built a story, but you're not necessarily presenting a story in the comic strip because you only have 4 panels of setup, joke. But you do allow for a much more longer term character development, which is impossible, I would say, with a single panel. I mean, you have almost tropish character presentations of Dennis the Menace, he's a little shit. Ziggy, he's you remember, Brad, from your favorite Ziggy punchline of all times. What is Ziggy like?
Well, Ziggy is like, I'd ask you to join me at the table, but I've already ordered for one.
Never gets old with me. It never gets old. So Ziggy is about, it's basically a single panel is almost the memification of a character. You know what I mean? It's a character that never changes because they don't have an opportunity to change. The only way the joke works is if Ziggy is always a sad sack, is if Dennis the Menace is always a little shit, is if Marmaduke is always a big dog. That's the only way there is no forward motion for that character. There's no arc because it stops working as soon as there's forward motion or an arc. So everyone is frozen in time, kind of like a meme. And they do not change, right? Only the jokes change. The character themselves never changes. Whereas a comic strip, I don't know that I would argue that they can change, but the settings and the setups can change for a character who themselves is kind of established in stone. You can maybe, for better or for worse, characters over the course of 10 years slightly change their arc, but you really have to have the commitment of the reader and the cartoonist.
Well, and that's where we get into this whole thing that I keep kind of harping on time after time. And that is, yes, you could in the newspaper publishing sphere. Whereas today, I really do think that in terms of like a 3 or 4 panel comic strip, that whole thing has been lost to us by and large because our audience isn't exposed to that strip on a daily basis in the newspaper. I think you can still do it. And there are some people that are doing it very well. People who started their careers a long time ago and kind of built that user base up, and it can be done. I guess my argument is if you were starting it today, it would be so hard to build your audience in today's landscape that I'd kind of try to dissuade people from it.
Yeah. So to put a final button on this, the way I would reduce the different types of comics are single panel is pure idea, right? It's just concept. It's just joke. It's just idea. It's just a idea, a joke. Comic strips are characters reacting to settings. I think that's the reduction of a comic strip.
Yeah.
Short stories, graphic novels, that's story. That's where story comes in of a character meets a limiter somehow and is trying to achieve a goal, right? That's where you can do the traditional character arcs, is short story and graphic novel. But I think that is there any other version, Brad, that you would like to elucidate on that? I keep saying elucidate today, but go ahead.
I like elucidate. I'm actually going to give us I think that's good on that part of the question, but there's the hard part of the question that we are both studiously ignoring.
Oh, are we? Okay, what am I missing?
The hard part. The last part of that question is, do we have any tips on writing single panel comics? Now, the go-to answer for me is become a $5 Patreon backer. We've got about 20 or 25 pro tips episodes, which are called Writer's Room, where we do exactly that in real time. We write what mostly ends up in many cases, not all, but in many cases ends up being a single panel comic. And you can hear us do that and how we go about that. So if you're looking for that, I would encourage you to check out some of those Writers' Rooms episodes where we ended up on a single panel. But let's go even further than that, Dave. How do we go towards writing a single panel comic?
Well, one of the reasons why I just want to jump in real quick and say, one of the interesting things about those Writers' Rooms is you can see Brad and I switch a joke from single panel to multiple panels, or from multiple panels to single panel. And I think it's instructive to see the reasons why two professional cartoonists go, okay, if we take that approach, and I like that approach, this now becomes a single panel cartoon. And we'll talk about why it now becomes a single panel cartoon. And I think that's helpful for artists to see why one necessitates a switch and another idea doesn't. So anyway, just to helpfully point that out. But anyway, as far as tips that are specific to writing, I think recognize that you can apply your characters to a single panel comic strip. So if they have more of a buildup and a world that you are constructing in the comic strips, and you occasionally do a single panel, kind of like what Family Circus would do on Sundays, or I guess the reverse, is that you can then use established characters to make discrete jokes, discrete ideas, not discrete as in whispering, but discrete as in a small compact unit of a joke in a single panel. Because really, the single panel is just the idea. It's the presentation of the idea. And so really, my best writing tip would be reduce everything that you can, extraneous details that are unnecessary, nothing that could be construed as a Chekhov's gun of like, why is there a fishing pole in the background? Is that important to the joke? Take it out. Just take it out the visual. Like, you're just presenting a single idea, which is usually one or two characters reacting to a concept. Brad, other inputs that you would want to say?
Yeah, I'd say write the punchline first and then work backwards from there. In other words, since this is so distilled into that, I think you're going to find a lot of use out of really zeroing in on what that punchline is and finessing it and editing it and polishing it, and then figure out how it's best to present that punchline. What scene is best to illustrate that punchline? Because I think if you go the other way, you're gonna end up kind of building onto it. And really, this is about erosion. This is about like almost sanding down a wood surface until it's smooth, not building something up. So I would say try to get to what the punchline is, and then decide what the best way to present that is.
Yeah, I find too that as a pure writing exercise, single panel is really fun in that it's almost like the perfect execution of that writer's technique of like, all right, Brad, you've got an astronaut and you've got a canoe and he's eating a sandwich, go, right? Like that idea of like take just mashups of ideas. So many single panels are really conducive to just having fun. And so to improvisation. Right. And yeah, exactly. Because you'll have, I don't know, a fisherman that's on the moon. All right, make that joke work now, and in a single panel, that's where those kind of ideas kind of shine. I love those kind of mashup ideas for single panels. It's a fun way to write. It's funny that this topic came up today because I actually just last night, because I'm home alone, essentially. My wife was working and my wonderful in-laws took the kids to visit their cousins. I've been totally bacheloring it this past 4 days, Brad. So I've reverted. This is a total different topic. I've reverted to my habits from my 20s. I'll be cartooning until 3 a.m., right?
Oh, and my gosh.
Last night at 3 a.m., I was cartooning a single panel joke and I stuck the landing. And I got to tell you, Nemo, there's nothing sweeter than when you stick the landing on a single panel, because as a writer, it's just it's the distillation, and it's so fun when you're like, I can remove this word, I can remove this word, I can remove these details, I can cut this whole thing in the background out of here. I don't need any of this. Yeah. And it's just pure joke. It's pure idea. And I find that so satisfying when you can stick it,
Yeah, I absolutely. And by the way, before we go much further and our readers and our listeners tell us where to stick it, it's time for us to bring this show to an end. And that means it's my time to say you've been listening to Comic Lab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
Your hosts have been my friend Brad Geiger, the one who always sticks the landing in front of the Russian judge, the editor of webcomics.com, and the creator of Evil Inc. at evil-comic.com.
And my good friend who is stuck by me through thick and thin, Dave Kellett, the co-director of Strip, the comics documentary, and the cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com, and Drive at drivecomic.com.
And just a reminder, you can join us every week. This show is going out live to our VIP members right now over at patreon.com/comiclab. Join the Comic Lab Live Gab community. I almost said it without messing that up. How good for me. And the Comic Lab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net. And this episode was edited by Matt Woodard at Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media.
And of course, another thank you goes out to our fantastic sponsor, Wacom, makers of the beautiful Wacom One. If you love Comic Lab, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, and you may hear your review featured on a future episode.
And Comic Lab is made possible by your support on patreon.com/Comic Lab. So we'll go ahead and say that like Brad's favorite Ziggy punchline of all time.
I've been waiting all day for the mailman, and still, it looks like my social life is expired.
That one doesn't even make sense, and I love it. It still works as a Ziggy joke.
Oh, Dave, we forgot the other sponsor. We're supposed to announce our new sponsor, the new drink sponsor that we've got that is bringing the show to us. And as you remember, who is that again?
Oh, Brad, that's, of course, Dr. Hidalgo's Lugubrious Cherry Soda, sold exclusively in a 3-mile radius around Philadelphia to cartoonists that don't know what a real soda tastes like. Remember the tagline of Dr. Hidalgo's Lugubrious Cherry Soda?
I can't write.